Good evening. So another great response. This is wonderful for our second Trent Kawartha Land Trust lecture. Thank you everyone for coming. And thank you for taking your time to share this experience on a beautiful, warm spring evening. I was told last time I didn't introduce myself by Judith Platt, so I'm going to do that. I'm Mike Hendren. According to my name tag, I'm the Executive Director of Kawartha Land Trust. Just a reminder that this lecture is being recorded, so you have to behave yourselves. Some of you were with us last time, and you will recall we offered some background on Kawartha Land Trust and our partnership with Trent. It was a bit of a PhD at Trent in detail. We won't do that again. We spoke of our shared values, and we offered thanks to the countless number of Trent and Kawartha Land Trust folks that made this series and our wider partnership happen. For those of you that are not aware, Kawartha Land Trust provides a solution to our community by setting conservation priorities and protecting lands with natural and some historic values as well. Our mission is caring for the lands entrusted to us and helping others protect the land they love in the Kawarthas. With Kawartha Land Trust and Trent on the masthead, tonight we have the pleasure of adding a third organization to the mix. Our exclusive sponsor tonight is Cambium Inc. Cambium is a Peterborough-based consulting and engineering firm delivering practical and sustainable solutions for their clients' challenges with regard to developing lands in a sustainable manner. With a team of environmental, biological, and geotechnical specialists, Cambium works with clients of all levels, from landowners to businesses to municipalities, in managing natural resources to ensure the health of our environment for generations to come. We at Kawartha Land Trust know well that Cambium's team gives generously to our community, and we've had many of their staff as volunteers. Thank you to Cambium for their generous support tonight. What a wonderful thing to have such a wealth of information and support in this community. And finally, I have the great pleasure to announce our speaker tonight, Rick Beaver. Rick is Anishinaabe descent and currently resides on Alderville First Nation in Ontario, but he has lived on the Pacific, he's lived on the prairies, and in the mountains of Western Canada. His early traditional influences and his formal education as a wildlife biologist combine scientific knowledge with passionate respect for all things. He has been a professional visual artist for more than 30 years. His animated portraits celebrate the exciting possibilities of land, life, and time in many mediums. We may see some of those tonight. He has been involved in social and environmental concerns, from the African famine relief, the Canadian Native Arts Foundation, Earth Day, and the Western Canada Wilderness Committees, for which he was awarded the Governor-General's Commemorative Medal in 1993 and an Honorary Doctorate of Laws degree from our own Trent University in 2011. Rick has hosted and appeared in several documentaries and has participated creatively in many design and environmental projects, including the Canadian Canoe Museum and the preservation and restoration of the Black Oak Savanna on Alderville First Nation, where he's currently the Research and Restoration Coordinator. Black Oak Savanna just received the Ontario Government Award for Environmental Excellence. Rick works with Kawartha Land Trust partner Northumberland Land Trust and the Nature Conservancy Canada, and from what I understand has some inspiration tonight from their success. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Rick Beaver.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mike, and to the Kawartha Land Trust for their gracious invitation to have me speak to you today, this wonderful spring evening, on obviously a subject very dear to my heart. I've had the wonderful fortune of sharing this experience and the accomplishments that we have managed to achieve environmentally with a great number of people. I've been succeeded during the hiatus that I took a few years ago to Mexico by some very capable people, was led into this enterprise by people knowledgeable in some of the environments that I'll be speaking about today. And to them, I would like to express now my thanks and gratitude for the introductions, the wisdoms they imparted to me, and quite frankly, the enthusiasm and love we share for things on this earth. Among them, I am from Alderville First Nation, a nation of Mississauga people who arrived in this part of the world from the Bay of Quinte in about 1837, transported from a frontier of pioneering settlement and settled on the shores of Rice Lake, which at that time was, relatively speaking, unoccupied, but not for long. And to them it was called the Lake of Burning Plains, Pemadash Dakota, Pemadash Kodeang, and Y is sort of the beginning of the current legacy that we are all involved in. Cultural practices, traditions, were of such a nature that supported the types of environments that they're known for, primarily among them, but not exclusively, the black oak savanna and prairie. Burning being foremost among them, a tradition to clear land for agricultural purposes, modifications of the environment to foster different animals, browsing animals primarily, which they hunted gleefully. And we have carried that on somehow as a tradition. So this environment survived from an original tract measuring some 200 to 300 square miles on between Lake Ontario and Rice Lake. And we have the largest remnant of it remaining today. To that practice, to that community, to those people who preceded us there, I thank you, because they have left us an environment and cultural legacy. So honored by our chief and council in the year 2000. So it now remains as a core part of the partnership of whom I want to speak about tonight. So I am to address the involvement of that culture in the current context of environmental stewardship. So I'm going to begin there. There's no widely acceptable definition of traditional knowledge. All I know is that we all have it somehow. It's not an exclusive thing. So we may look at traditional knowledge as a cumulative body of knowledge, practice, and belief about the relationship of living beings, that includes us, with one another and their environment. While that may seem like a pretty big universe, we're learning today that this world is actually quite small and things are running into each other all the time. So in this is a piece of my work here, we're alluding to those coalescence and joining of traditional cultures. We call the drum the telescope of the heart. And as we see in the environment, we also use telescopes and laser beams to stabilize our vision of the rest of the universe. So with these kind of formative and motivational thoughts, we begin our investigation. How do we work together? Is it a cultural difference? Is it something that prevents common understanding? I don't think so. This statement comes from UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, so-called the intellectual part of the United Nations. Indigenous knowledge may advance scientific understandings, providing new information and perspectives that supersede those currently held by scientists. This is particularly evident in remote areas that have not been at the heart of mainstream scientific research. The recognition that local and indigenous peoples have their own ecological understandings, conservation practices, and resource management goals has important implications. It transforms the relationship between biodiversity managers, the position I now hold officially, and local communities. While previously they were perceived simply as resource users, Indigenous people are now recognized as essential partners in environmental management. However, differences between scientific and Indigenous worldviews continue to create barriers to meaningful collaboration, as does the widespread assumption that science is superior to other knowledge systems. How are we to successfully negotiate these perceptions? Well, I think it becomes a lot easier when one recognizes the necessity to cooperate, to move forward, to address some of our significant and shared concerns, in my case, environmentally. How do we bring groups together, to work together? Well, you make approaches. Part of the necessity is revealed here that 40% of Canada's 350 currently listed species at risk are found in First Nation lands, which constitute only 1% of this country's landmass. This list is growing all the time. And the vast majority of those species are found in the areas of highest human population densities around the Great Lakes, southern Ontario, and the coastlines. A question that I asked myself very early on in the career, and continue to ask, is how long can landscapes which can no longer sustain wildlife population witness these statistics about the decline in the vigor and diversity of those populations? How long can they sustain humanity? We're not immune, of course, and thus comes the justification and the recognition by others that we work with. Our mission on the Alderville Black Oak Savanna is to preserve, restore, and expand this rare habitat, this referencing savanna and prairie, and the larger community, and to support the values which encourage wise stewardship of the land. If that sounds familiar, I heard similar words echoed by Mike in his introduction to me. And you will see them repeated, not word and verse exactly, but with a similar sentiment. So there's obviously a commonality there that we're going to work with. I'm going to discuss with you how Alderville First Nation and its partners in the Rice Lake Plains Joint Initiative are addressing one of the rarest environments on the earth. Less than 1% of this habitat remains globally. And if you think about that, I find it unacceptable. And it's what spurred me to get further involved in this issue. We work with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. It's a nonprofit habitat conservation organization founded in 1962 who uses a non-confrontational and creative approaches. I would like to think one of their creative approaches was approaching Alderville First Nation a few years ago and sought our advice and counsel and cooperation and energy to assist them in this process. Partnerships are definitely part of the equation. Individuals, corporations, community groups, conservation groups, and government bodies. I hope I didn't leave anybody out because the list is extensive and growing. The Nature Conservancy and its supporters have helped protect nearly 2 million acres, 765,000 hectares of ecologically significant land across Canada, addressing problems that are very similar to the ones we experience with oak savannas. Over half of these projects are in Ontario, and they have holdings of approximately 2,000 acres in the Rice Lake Plains area. Now, these are their conservation plans, both nationally and on the south shore of Rice Lake, where we see the location of Alderville First Nation in pink. You will see the holdings of our partners scattered around this once extensive area, which is actually part of the Oak Ridges Moraine too as well, an area of broader concern, I guess you would say. On the Oak Ridges Moraine, you may have heard quite a bit about that. They are also one of our partnerships, sponsoring both financially, logistically, and creatively. These are some of the views of it. One of the largest groundwater catchment areas in Canada. Glacial deposits, highly variable in both soils, topography, and biodiversity. Where you can see such things as this, giant oak trees, and this is on the Rice Lake Plains in Northumberland County. We're talking here about tallgrass habitats, defined. Prairies are dominated by grasses, usually with less than 25% tree cover. These are not absolutes. There are gradations here involved. Many interpretations of environmental conditions. And the same is true of prairies and savannas, where savannas have a little bit more tree cover. Primarily drought-tolerant, heat-tolerant species like oaks and others, aspens, I suppose, some pines. A gradation into woodland with a little more variety of trees, and then eventually forests with over 60% tree cover. There are also sand barrens with very little vegetation at all, and some of the species inhabiting those are extremely interesting. Almost desert-like, mini deserts. These are the original map of the original extent of tallgrass prairie, intermixed with savanna and woodland, except along its western edge. Now, that is primarily an influence of the Rocky Mountains and the climatic horses which gallop across North America. In the lee of the Rocky Mountains, it's a little bit drier. Trees won't survive there. But in this area, we're talking about tallgrass savanna and woodland, little peninsulas. It's been called in Ontario the Prairie Peninsula. I'd like to refer to it more as an archipelago because it's quite fractured and not continuous. And of course, the Rice Lake Plains were one of those areas. Here's a historical look at the extent of prairie and savanna vegetation in southern Ontario. And I think you can see what I mean there. There seem to be certain little concentrations, little islands, and they bump around, little pockets here and there, some of them more extensive, Walpole Island being a magnificent example. I think Walpole Island has about 100 species currently listed at risk, located in that area of the country right there. But there we are, up in this area. And according to the legends, there's more savanna in these areas than prairie. And you can see where the prairie becomes more prevalent as you approach sort of the center of its evolution in the western United States. Here's a qualitative look at some of those sites. A star, as we all got in school, is a pretty good indication that you're doing okay. There are not many stars on this map. A lot of those are located around Lake Huron area. Ours isn't in bad shape. We have the largest remnant left of the Rice Lake Plains. And we're talking 150 acres that we're managing. It's the largest garden I've ever worked in. But compared to 200 acres, now that would be a backbreaker, I tell you. Here we are here. We get some of these figures from the early surveyors, of course, who were mapping out the country prior to development. And some of these date back to the 1700s, amazingly enough. Here are their names, and according to the notes that they took as they were marching across this frontier landscape, comments they made, from which we can infer that there was some prairie and savanna remnants or consistency to the area. So it runs roughly, in terms of longitudinal area, from Port Hope in the west to Castleton in the east, and between Lake Ontario and Rice Lake. There are outliers here, and some of those are significant too, but not the subject of this evening's conversation. We've focused on the Rice Lake Plains. Here's a rendition of an original tall grass landscape. Open, scattered trees, more verdant forested vegetation along the rivers, which were frequent in this part of the moraine. Drainages both into Rice Lake, eastward to the Trent River, and southward to Lake Ontario. One of the early writers and a fairly good botanist in her own right, was Catherine Partrail. She wrote this: "We now ascended the plains, a fine elevation of land for many miles, scantily clothed in oaks, and here and there bushy pines." Now, if that doesn't describe a savanna and prairie, I don't know what does. A number of exquisite flowers and shrubs adorn these plains, which rival any garden in beauty. I'll agree with that. There's a closer look at what we were just looking at, and what I thought originally was a figure, and when I flashed this side, I was quite surprised to see that it was a coneflower and a fritillary, and I recognized some of those things. I have one issue. It's never been documented that there were buffalo there. And having been accused of trying to bring back the buffalo, I take issue with that. As far as we know, there were never buffalo there. Elk and cougars, yes, but they aren't there anymore. How did it disappear? Well, it was farmed. That changes the soil through processes of tilling. Settlement, it developed. And of course, with properties come risks associated with buildings burning down, danger to human life. So fire was suppressed. Fire is the friend of these transitional landscapes, which are neither forest nor plains or desert. It's a continual war and jostling on the edge of grasslands where the forest is attempting to take over, and one of the mediators of that contest is fire. So fire, as you can well imagine, is a useful tool when you're managing these types of landscapes. Trees were planted on it, with every good intent. There was a period we went through where trees anchor the soil, and that's true. Northumberland hills were once almost denuded from the practices of farming and poor soil management, so trees were planted to anchor them. Forgetting, of course, that deep-rooted prairie plants and grasses are also good anchors of soil. So tree planting shaded out many of these areas, outcompeted them. In many cases, they were non-native species, and they ran amok. Among them, favorite Christmas tree, Scotch pine. We don't like Scotch pine where we are, except at Christmas time. Recreation, of course, using the land, sometimes in densities and at rates that are not sustainable. And then, of course, with global travel, the ease with which people began moving around the world in ships and airplanes and motor vehicles traversing the land. Invasive species they're ready hitchhikers for these types of things. They arrive on the land with no natural enemies, pristine landscape, and they can outcompete our native species to an incredible degree, and they're one of the issues that we deal with in what it is that we do. These are some of the native grasses of prairie grassland. Big blue stem, or turkey foot, isn't that well named, in the middle? And Indian grass on the right, your left, I guess, my left, your right, whoop, whoop, and that little blue stem on the left. Some of these plants, 70-80% of their mass is located under the ground. And for a plant like little blue stem, which is short, that doesn't seem like much. But when you're talking a 7-foot or 8-foot tall grass like big blue stem, a 10-foot root is a significant issue. Of course, they're adapted to drought. They're called warm season plants. They don't start to grow until the heat of summer. And by that method, they become owners of these impoverished, dry soils. Some of the others, going from the lower left, prairie buttercup, up to New Jersey tea and round-headed bush clover on the right. Incidentally, these are all traditional native medicines too as well, which found their way into the pharmacological lexicon of both Europe and North America. With rare environments come rare associates. These are the things that depend on the unique ecological niches or occupations or addresses, if you will, that exist in these rare environments. So as these environments became rare, so did a number of other animals. Some of these are not exclusively dependent on these types of environments, but they're frequently associated with it. And prairies and savannas can be associated with these species like red-headed woodpecker, common nighthawk, upland plover, and this wonderful little tiger beetle down here. Doesn't he look like a predator? He's got those big goggly eyes and they can run like the wind. Eastern hognose snake is another one. We, like many societies, have kind of a strange relationship with snakes. And I think this probably explains it for this poor fella. It looks a lot like a cobra, and I don't know too many people who are enamored with having a hood flashed at them and being confronted in this manner. But it's really quite an imposter. Failing this display, if you molest it, it'll roll over on its back and play dead. If you roll it back onto its belly, don't believe me, huh? Roll back over on its back. And stay that way until you either go away or fail to fall for the ruse. But it's quite effective for this creature. It's rare. It overwinters in burrows of different fossorial animals, like woodchucks, which have suffered a lung disease and are no longer as common as they used to be. Can we explain its total disappearance from many landscapes due to that? I don't think so. There are lots of roads to get run over on. People do hit them with sticks and shovels and whatever they happen to find in their hands. And its reliance on these soft soils, dry habitats, are such that it's a species we have yet to see on our savanna. We're surrounded by sightings of it, but not this particular individual itself. Saying that, you never know. Yesterday, I think maybe the day before, Radek Dolchik, who is manning our Savannah booth over here, go and say hello, by the way. We were sitting at the window looking over the prairie and outside having a cup of coffee, admiring it. And another creature, which we'd been looking for 5 years and never clapped eyes on, comes strolling across the grass. It was a Blanding's turtle. This is about 2 kilometers from the nearest water source. So we learned a lot about those things those days, so we're hopeful. Another plant of our savannas is the perennial wild blue lupin, the sole known host of the now extinct Carner blue butterfly. Probably suffered the same fate as many other creatures whose living was taken from them. This butterfly now exists in the United States, but to my knowledge is no longer found in Canada. We do have blue lupins, though, and we have been husbanding them in the Alderville Savannah because other creatures feed on them, like bumblebees and some forms of butterflies as well. So they're good things to have around. They're part of the components that we look for. There's a close-up of that plant, and there's a close-up of the butterfly, which no longer exists in this country. Threats that we deal with and our partners deal with today are very similar to those posted from the early days lamenting the loss of prairies and savannas. The succession of savanna and prairie to forest, due to fire suppression and other things. Invasive species, incompatible recreation, the alteration of the landscape by motorized vehicles. They also transfer invasive species around. They're very, very hard on fragile environments. Other threats. There's a lack of awareness about these habitats. And why wouldn't there be? There's not many of them left anymore. Not many people have the privilege like I did growing up as a youngster of romping around through, verdant pastures of butterfly weed and big blue stem. It used to be much more extensive even in the area that I'm familiar with than it is today. There are things easily overlooked. Its beauty is a subtle beauty. Things are often small and not spectacular. Not always true, but in most cases. So therefore we have a lack of recognition of them, and resources are at times difficult to come by. Not impossible, sometimes difficult. And lack of coordination. This new awareness is just now getting to the critical point where coordination of our activities becomes one of the most important things we are engaged in this whole effort to redeem what was once a much larger area. So, those are the things we address. We begin by acquiring, assessing areas that are known to have significant representation of rare creatures, rare habitats. The Nature Conservancy did it in the Birding Carmel properties, purchased in 2001, 811 acres. And I know similar things are engaged here with the Kawartha Land Trust. The overall holdings in our area by the Nature Conservancy are about 2,000 acres, and I believe yours are in that figure too, in this area. So you begin with this, land securement. In addition to Peters Woods Provincial Park, if you've never been there, I highly recommend a visit to there. The oldest oaks and maples in Ontario are found there, 400 to 500 years old, and they are truly magnificent. Just absolutely beautiful. We look to Ontario Parks, the Ministry of Natural Resources, now the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests, and private donors. The Oak Ridges Moraine Foundation itself, with whom we find a significant amount of agreement. Donations from private individuals. Dr. Barr, 32 acres in 2006. And out of this, it's like a star forming. There's enough mass coalescing and it begins to move, and there's a gravity result. The gravity in this case was the Rice Lake Plains Joint Initiative. And these were the members at that time, formed very early on. Alderville joined at a later date. The Memorandum of Understanding was signed, stating a common vision, agreement to collaborate, share resources, share your activities, and really important here is a chance to learn. Our education and outreach components are one of the most important things we do. We work a lot with young people, university students and researchers, anybody with a curiosity about the novelty of doing these kinds of things. The memorandum is not legally binding, but who wants to lie to your peers? We have quarterly meetings. Informal notes are circulated with action items, and the chair is available to all. And these are wonderful meeting places at times. Great boardrooms. Here's our vision. Simply the restoration and protection of tallgrass prairie and oak savanna habitat through cooperative efforts in conservation science, land stewardship, public outreach, and legal protection of the land. Here's some of the shared communications that are engaged in. We have a publication, the Savannah Sentinel. We send out things to one another for anniversary events. Our 10th anniversary was just last year. We have annual events like Prairie Day, to which the public is welcome to check out what we're doing, see it, actually go on a tour. Everybody's welcome. It's a family affair. We work a lot with private landowners, obviously, too. There's only so much you can do with public lands and acquired lands. If this is at all to work, we require these cooperative agreements. So we do a lot of education, and we're really grateful to be able to work with private landlords. And that includes on Alderville First Nation. You know, while they may be classified as federal lands, what a lot of people don't know is much of the land held on our First Nation is under what's called a certificate of possession. So we rely on the good graces of the holders of those certificates to be approachable to some of our suggestions. We do press releases. We hold workshops. We held one at the Alderville Savannah just this past winter on gardening with native plants. It was very well received. We do press releases, news articles, and we do a tremendous amount of landowner outreach. We cooperate in sharing the data, what we learn. How do you share data that is in the domain of Indigenous knowledge? Well, that's one of our challenges, and there's a lot of discussion about that. But it needs to be done. We've brought back burning. We've done a lot of outreach to municipalities who govern such things. The value of doing such things to maintain a healthy, diverse environment. And prairies and savannas are one of them. So what used to be feared and the authorities called, and maybe the irons clapped on you if you were caught doing this, we now do as a matter of business, normal business, to restore, regenerate the land. These are the areas, blow up of the area we're concerned with. Our partner is Northumberland County Forest, for instance. These are NCC properties. The Lower Trent Conservation Authority, the Red Cloud Cemetery. There is Alderville First Nation, Black Oak Savanna here. So there are many, many people involved in attempting to bring back some semblance of this once vibrant ecosystem. So we do fires. This is, some years it's like this. They are prescribed burns. You have to follow a very rigorous set of conditions before the conditions are met to do it safely in a manner that's controllable. In an ideal year, you would be able to do it all that you want to do. This year was one of them. About 95% of what was planned was done. The other 5 were deemed to be not suitable. The vision was revisited in 2007. This time they envisioned a landscape of protected, restored, and sustainably managed tallgrass prairie and oak savanna ecosystems amid well-stewarded forest, wetland, and riparian habitats of the Rice Lake Plains region. So, yes, a more expansive vision of the total landscape, the total ecosystem, and what can be done with it. We embarked on studies of species at risk across the entire Alderville First Nation, for instance, as opposed to just restricted to the savanna, which will always mean a dear part, the core, very passionate part of the overall effort. But we are now expanding that. Our partnerships have grown over the years and now include land trusts, organizations associated with, like Tallgrass Ontario. Alderville First Nation is now involved. And I think probably that's going to continue for some time. Then the issue of the moraine and its development came along, groundwater, and again, similar concerns. So working with them. We collaborate on volunteer events. I think this is Mark Stab, actually, the Eastern Director of the Nature Conservancy, having his day with a Scotch pine. Provide funding assistance for land. This is Dave Mowat, Economic Development Officer for our First Nation, myself, and Mark Stab as well. They assisted us to purchase 12 acres of certificate of possession lands adjacent to the savanna, and we're now whaling away at that, turning it from a former pea and oat farm into black oak savanna. That's a vision that's only going to take 20 or 30 years, but it keeps you busy. Collaboration on land securement is another function of the joint initiative. And this shows something of the corridor development that's perceived to be one of the most effective ways of ensuring prolonged success. Islands floating in the mainstream of other altered habitats don't do so well. So joining the dots is part of the longer, broad-term vision. And of course, that has to do with land securement and agreements that allow us to function that way. We collaborate on fundraising. These are some of the people that have supported our efforts in the early days. Habitat Stewardship Program, that's a federal program, Environment Canada. Our own community kicks in its share, supports the program. We're really grateful for that. We have also the Aboriginal funding for species at risk, again a federal program. There is the Ministry Fund, Ontario Species at Risk Prevention Fund, and the Stewardship Fund. We're currently manage about 8 funding streams. grateful for it. It's part of the good work that we do and need to do to carry out this work. There are incredible public outreach programs. We have the grace and benefit of the experience and abilities of educators, enthusiastic people, to carry this message of why we do this out into the broader public. It's part of what we feel is a long-term and sustainable change to allow these things to happen. We take tours out. So if you're looking at one of our other partners, the Northumberland County Forest, they have a pretty massive holding and presence in the area, 5,400 acres in the natural core and the moraine, lots of trails, motorized and non-motorized. So this is a multi-use kind of approach for which the plan has to be a little bit more protracted, communicative, and organized at a fairly sophisticated level. Some of the species found there are the hognose snake, which I said we don't have, monarch butterfly, whippoorwill, red-shouldered hawk, and surprising thing is across my desk every week pass maybe one or two new species that are being evaluated for risk categories. And on that list are some pretty shocking and amazing critters that used to be very, very common in my experience, and maybe yours too as well. So there is some urgency to this, to address them, to keep them from deteriorating further. Rare and significant habitats in the Northumberland County Forest, one of our partners, include black oak savannas, a Mill Valley Anse area, very important, Burnie Carmel, which is also that, areas of natural and scientific interest. These are influences that the Northumberland County Forest is involved in. Drainage systems, animal travel corridors, dispersal and migration, watersheds. All of this goes into thinking about the planning that's done. So the land use planning is an important part of it. The benefits of our organization, and I'm sure that Kawartha Land Trust is finding this to be true too, are accessing funds, funds to do the things that you need to do. They do require significant resources to restore across broad areas of the landscape, not just one ecosystem or another, to integrate, to treat it as a landscape functional, effective tool. It gives us access to expertise to do inventories, which we're engaged in. We communicate with other partners. We get together regularly. We share information. We contact landowners. We do species inventories and tracking. And we share strategic objectives. For instance, land acquisitions. We set priority for areas that are going to be restored. Particularly important when resources are not quite what you might like. So areas like this are considered. That's in the Northumberland County Forest. Money to do burdens. This is a job for professionals. And believe you me, they know what they're doing. They're worth every penny that you spend on them. And you know, their liability coverage is pretty decent too. The Northumberland Land Trust was initiated by the Willow Beach field naturalist, a group of similarly minded individuals growing out of an area of interest in the natural environment and the things in it. In 2001, was founded in 2004. Their mission is to preserve the natural, historical, and cultural heritage of Northumberland County. These things have a familiar ring to them, a resonance that is really easy to work with. Their first acquisition was the Laurie Lawson Outdoor Education Center, again emphasizing the importance not only of land holdings, but as a mechanism for teaching, broadening the awareness of the broader public. They have 4 properties in trust with a total of 429 acres. So we go through the list again, and we see that this is expanding as we go along. The public outreach and presence is becoming increasingly important. There are some of the individuals involved in this whole process. Very rarely do you see them scuffling. They're all happily engaged, as most of us are in this activity, as they look out on this type of environment. This big screen is beautiful, I must say. Here are some of the keys we view for success. The photograph there is the Red Cloud Cemetery Prairie. An interesting situation, Pioneer Prairie. It looks like a scene you might see out of an old Western movie. It's a true prairie, a very interesting one, and maintained because of the activities on this old cemetery. So we have a diversity of partners. That's absolutely essential. There is a cultural context. It's a universe of like thinking. Suggestions are always welcome. There's an openness there. Somebody has to take responsibility for coordinating, and in our case it's been the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and we play supportive roles to that. We share a vision and common goals, and of course we are willing to share. We collect seeds, for instance. We were fortunate enough to get funding to buy a seed harvester. Now, a fancier piece of equipment you've never seen if you're used to going out there by hand, bending over in October for days and hours, asking volunteers to share, and you greatly enjoy doing so. And this came in on a transport truck from Manitoba. I think it doubled or tripled our seed production. We rode around in it. And we share, that increase in productivity with our partners who are just crying for some of these resources to begin the restoration projects. So we do those types of things, help each other out. It's an informal structure. We all kind of are doing our own thing, and we get together and talk about it periodically. In this business of research and restoration, you have to be patient. As an example, there was one field which we began restoring in the early 2000s. It was in corn and oats. I've got photographs of it, not in this presentation, unfortunately. Only now can we walk past that and see the bobolinks in it, the meadowlarks, the tall grass waving, Blanding's turtles running through it occasionally. Those kind of things. That's 15 years ago. So you do have to be patient. We like to believe that we share a genuine commitment to the conservation of this environment. We have to be adaptable. We have great habitat, and we have some examples left to aim for. Prototypes. Prototypical environments upon which to base our targets and goals. Passion, absolutely, without saying too much more about that. It is a place of extreme passion, sort of heart-forward approach to doing science and restoration. We get regular get-togethers, including Prairie Day that I mentioned, which is always, I think it's on the 26th of September this year. There's music, there's food, there's art, there's tours, of some of the properties. In short, there's no cranky downers to bring us down. Always room for improvement, though. We need the continued leadership from various organizations. All members should take a part and be active and committed to it. We have in the past suffered a lack of coordination by not having it centralized, having it through one person in responsibility. A woman by the name of Becky Lyon has accomplished that very necessary task and done it rather well for us this year. Becky is here. Becky, thank you. Keeps us all together. And of course, a consistent and committed volunteer-based supporting program. You would not believe the amount of good volunteers have done for us. After you've been that busy all year doing things, to have somebody come in and actually be grateful for the chance to pull spotted knapweed, you can't believe what a gift that is. It truly is appreciated. We continue on. We're continually strategizing about the landscape. We're installing interpretive gardens at the Alderville Black Oak Savanna. It's part of the prevention fund of species at risk. It's part of our outreach and education program to take care of those things, hopefully, which will never fall on this list. Proactive, in other words. And to tell people about it in a very concentrated and accessible form to again bring this important message to them. We seek the involvement of local landowners as we go out and do our surveys on species at risk. Not all of these things conveniently fall into territories that we have can exercise some respectable control and act directly. We need the cooperation of landowners. And I think this whole exercise on any scale like this, and even larger, needs that important component. So we seek their involvement. We try to get the name out there, a concentrated effort to, media, politicians, landowners about the purpose and the people behind the partnership, and seek their involvement in it. And to these partners and supporters, again, familiar names on there. Oak Ridges Moraine Foundation and the Ontario Trillium Foundation have been past supporters of our initiative. These are our particular sponsoring agencies on Alderville First Nation. We share some of these with others. We do have active and very important research and collegial relationships with Trent University, Fleming College. Not on here, the University of Guelph and Waterloo, Toronto. These are people that are satisfying a great need and curiosity about how the living things function in the lands and waters and air of our space. We've learned a lot from them. All we ask, we will take care of the logistics of your presence here. We just want to know some of the neat stuff you found out there. It helps us interpret it in a good way. And of course, it helps us manage it too. We have the benefit of different Indigenous organizations like the Ogamawaj Tribal Council, which represents 6 First Nations basically along the Trent-Severn Waterway. The Greenbelt Foundation, who are concerned with primarily agricultural activities in the corridor around Toronto. So they're all there. So thank you to the landowners. We always are considerate of that. Some of the gifts of the land, these are shots taken of various and sundry vistas and creatures inhabiting our own particular part of the world and those of our partners. It truly is an amazing environment. And I thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you, not only on its behalf, but I hope in the broader interest in the Canadian society and culture, whatever that may be generally. So thank you very much. I'll be entertaining questions from you.